So as the field of religion and ecology develops, it is very much a developing field, and I invite you to be part of this developing field. As it develops, I think the rules of engagement are still in the stage of creation. When I was writing my dissertation, there wasn't that many models. There weren't that many models that I could turn to for how to do this. And part of the difficulty is that religious studies has one way of doing things, or a set of ways of doing things. Philosophy has a set of ways of doing things. Biophysical environmental science has a set of ways of doing things, and so does social environmental science. So there are some epistemological challenges to bringing these various threads together. But I want to suggest, from my experience, some important aspects of method in bringing these threads together. And then I think I'll wrap up and we can talk. As I suggested in the beginning with the story about the Leopolds and their focus on their farm near Madison, an attention to particular place and space and embodied practices, I believe, are crucial to using religion and philosophy to better understand the ecological crisis. In other words, we have a global ecological crisis, but the results or the consequences take place in particular areas. They do take place everywhere in terms of global climate change, but they also have specific results in specific places. And without understanding those particular results, I don't think we can exert leverage on the overall situation. So the first thing is attention to place and space. Secondly is an attentive familiarity to local religious and spiritual practices and beliefs. That is in part why I gave you my piece on my research in Bhutan, was the particular practices through which the Bhutanese understand their relationship with the natural environment and their experience of deities in their beliefs and practices as a way of relating with the natural environment. It gives us a way to understand that relationship. And any culture is going to have a different way. That's just one way. But to understand what the particular beliefs and practices of a local religious group are is also very important. I think then a willingness to look for contributing factors in unexpected places. So science teaches us to look for linear cause and effect. But a lot of times the phenomenon may not have a linear cause and effect. And religious stories may help us see the more metaphysical and metaphorical interconnections between cause and effect that maybe aren't direct. So I think religious stories can help us tune in to the patterns that aren't as linear. And as I mentioned earlier, the textual retrieval, re-evaluation, and reconstruction that have been important in the textual work on religion and ecology can help reclaim within the religious tradition threads that are found to be more amenable to our modern times and places, so that texts do not have to be thrown out or abandoned, but can be brought into the modern milieu. And finally, I think that attention to power and distributive justice in the distribution of environmental burdens and benefits, who bears environmental burdens such as pollution or loss of topsoil or the worst consequences of global warming, who bears the environmental benefits, such as clean air, clean water, access to parks, access to trees, open spaces, an attention to how these burdens and benefits are shared among people in a culture is an important part of many religious traditions. The justice strand is very strong in many religious traditions. And this, again, can help us re-envision and reinterpret for a more flourishing world for everyone. So I think I will leave it there, and then we can just talk. Thanks. So I can answer questions or comments. Yeah, Becky.
I think something I'm really struggling with in my own relationship to the environmental movement and ecological issues is this idea of gender. I talked about this in the paper last semester that I'm still struggling with. A lot of the religions use feminine pronouns when they talk about, Mother Earth and Father Sky, and I'm just curious how you create that relationship in the Western world when, people seem to use feminine pronouns, but is that good for us to be using, or is it difficult, or what your thoughts are on experience?
Right. Yeah. No, I remember you raised that very thoughtfully in your paper. And I think it's a problem. I think ecofeminists have brought this up as a problem, actually splitting into two or more camps, some embracing the feminine relationship with nature and saying that women have somehow a closer relationship, more access. And if you look at nonprofit organizations and social justice organizations, they're often headed by women. And so some feminists have made the argument that there's more of a carrying capacity or tendency in women. I'm not really in favor of that sort of essentialization. And I think that it can actually divide people more than bringing people together. So I personally am not in favor of gendered pronouns for the earth and the sky. And I think we can just say earth or sky or whatever. I think part of it is that, like God, earth, cosmos, are so beyond the human experience in certain ways that I think to genderize them demeans them. So in some traditions of theology, God is never called he or she. God is always called God and not given a pronoun. And because to genderize God would be to put God in a smaller box than God can ever fit. And I think the same thing about nature, whatever that is, which is very complicated, or earth or cosmos, that to put it in a gendered box actually demeans it, and that we're better off trying to encompass the whole by just calling it its name, or whatever name we choose to call it.
Yeah. Isn't that a bit of a problem though, like in other languages that are inherently gendered? Like speaking
yeah, I'm speaking just in the American tradition. And that's why I'm saying attention to local specificity is really important. Like within another language and another tradition, that issue would have to be taken up within that context, for sure. And I'm sure that there are good reasons in some languages for that. But I think in English, which is my only competent language, that I wouldn't be in favor of genderizing. Yeah?
I mean, one way to think about it is James Hillman talks about how there's many different natures depending on which archetype you're looking through. So nature can appear as Pan, as a masculine, spirit of nature, or as Mother Gaia, and then beyond, whatever you choose to look at it. And so maybe it's not a question of just eliminating the gendered perspective, but understanding the sort of, there's multiple ways of seeing it at different times and in different contexts, and that at some point it may be valuable for a human being to find their mirror in nature, and at the same time be capable of understanding that transcendent, that's beyond that, beyond gender, and holding that multiple perspective, and then instead of just saying no gender or yes gender. And I have to say I agree with you in terms of the the ecofeminist idea that women are closer to nature. I would take a more like sexual difference and say perhaps men and women have different relationships to nature, different types of access, and it might be culturally constructed, it could be biological, we don't need to necessarily determine that, but it might be interesting to, instead of saying, one has privileged access, what are the different ways that we come into relationship to nature as men and as women, and which ways might we want to foster and help flourish because they're beneficial, which ways are, bound in tradition and parochial points of view.
I'm just not sure that within a group of women or within a group of men that there aren't more differences or as many differences as there are between groups. So to say, how men relate to nature or how women relate to nature, I mean, it's how different individuals relate.
There are definitely individual differences as well,
Yeah.
but I think it might be premature to erase gender difference in a culture where men and women are definitely raised differently.
Yes, definitely raised differently.
I mean, it's nice to say like, oh, well, it'd be great if we were all the same, but I just, and that's like a philosophical difference too. Like I personally come from I'm interested in the differences. I'm interested in preserving them and creating them, actually having different cultures, masculine cultures flourish and feminine cultures flourish. I'm not interested in and androgynous cultures and transsexual culture, multiplicity of sexual identities and gender identities.
Exactly, which would exist even within men and women.
Right.
So, yeah. Josh?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in nature encompasses all these different genders and all these different modes of reproduction. And so to sort of say, oh, there can only be one or only the other it's kind of ridiculous because there's so much variety and diversity. And also, we can distinguish identifying things as masculine or feminine from some of what Robert was talking about in his lecture about the rise of the divine feminine and how that relates to where we've been onto this masculine plane for the last few thousand years or tens of thousands of years. But yeah, and also it's the distinction between your own relationship with the earth and whether that has feminine qualities or whatever, how that plays out personally and your own relationship with the land, as opposed to saying, well, the earth is a mother and she's pissed at us.
Yeah.
I'm curious how your background from Yale and your kind of dual background in religion and ecology played over at UC Berkeley. Because, that strikes me as a hard science environment. Were they receptive?
Yeah. I said create a controversy and people will listen to you. I think that's why I got in, because they thought my proposal was so ludicrous that not ludicrous, but just unusual, So my department, Environmental Science Policy and Management at Berkeley, is a very materialist-based department, and includes both biophysical science and social science. The social science group is maybe a quarter of the whole department, so most of the folks are biophysical scientists.
So it's in the biology department?
No, it's in the College of Natural Resources. It's Environmental Science Policy and Management. But there's a lot of overlap with integrative biology, for sure. But there are also soil scientists who are more like physics, and a lot of organism study, soil science, and social science.